It's right on 5:30. Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to Nature's Happy Hour and the second series of Cocktails, Controversy and Conservation. It's nice to be back online after a few weeks of a break. I'm Chris Gambian. I'm the Chief Executive of the Nature Conservation Council of New South Wales. Now, we've got a bit of a funny episode tonight because we've pre-recorded this, Jackie, but we wanted to do an episode about diversity, and everybody on the panel is, well, brown-skinned. How does it feel to be an ethnic minority tonight, Jackie?
Look, put it this way, I'm happy to be the butt of your jokes all night, Chris. And we do, as Chris said, have a bit of an unusual cocktails event. It's pre-recorded, and you sat down with a group of activists for a chat about race.
Yeah, that's right, because I thought it'd be good to hear the perspectives of a group of non-Anglo people who are involved in the conservation movement and just see where the conversation takes us. And I've got to say, I really enjoyed it. We did it last week and it was fantastic. Yeah,
and I've had a sneak preview. It looks like a great conversation and some really important reflections from the panel that I really hope agitates the audience tonight, as I know that it did for me, and pushes all of us to reflect on the role that we play in systems of oppression in the conservation movement, but more broadly. It's definitely got me thinking.
So questions tonight are a little bit different because obviously the panelists can't see them, but still keen to hear them and definitely keen to hear your comments. This is the first cocktails where we've put out the advertising for it, and we've actually had a mixed bag of emails back. We don't normally get emails, but we had a couple of cranky people who thought that tonight was an affront to something or other. I'm not quite sure what, and a couple of people who thought it was a great idea, so that's nice. The audience tonight is a little bit lower, which I guess is kind of what SBS experiences every day of its life, right?
And as always with cocktails, if you need a drink, please get up and grab one. It's going to be a great conversation, so get settled in. And we are recording the talk, so you can watch it later on our website and on our Facebook page as always.
And very importantly, if you are enjoying yourself tonight, it would be wonderful if you would go to nature.org.au and send us some money, because as we like to say, koalas grow on trees, but money does not.
That's right. So yeah, let's get into it. Here's Chris with Asha Ramsen, Taylor Clarke, Thuy Nguyen, and Tim Surdo.
This feels fun to me to have. Like it almost feels like the lunatics have taken over the asylum or something.
I'm Asha Ramsen. I'm the Executive Officer of Sydney Community Forum, which is a regional community development organisation in Sydney. I'm a first-generation migrant. I came here as a girl at 16 to finish my high school education and go to university. So I'm basically an international student at 16. And I come from Fiji. I'm an Indian from Fiji and a descendant of basically slaves, indentured labourers, who replaced the slave trade and fed the need for cheap labour in the British Empire.
My name's Taylor Clarke. I'm a Gundungurra woman, so my family's from the Burragorring Valley within the Blue Mountains National Park. I'm on the board of NCC and I also work on the Give a Damn campaign with the Kurlong Foundation.
And I'm Thuy Nguyen, Community Organiser with the Sydney Alliance. The Sydney Alliance is a coalition of civil society organisations, including NGOs, trade unions, faith organisations, schools. All of us have an interest in working for the common good, and for the last 3 years I've been working on a project called Voices for Power, which is aiming to bring together community leaders from diverse ethnic and religious backgrounds to have a common voice on energy transition and climate justice. And my background, my parents are Vietnamese. We were resettled here after the Vietnam War.
My name is Tim. I work at Democracy in Colour. It's a racial and economic justice organisation led by people of colour. We're about 2.5 years old. We do two main types of work. We, one, do a lot of political advocacy around economic fairness and anti-racism. And the second piece of work we do is leadership development, capacity building and training work designed to strengthen the political voice of people of colour. I was born in sunny Queensland. And my mum is Chinese and my dad's Italian. So a real multicultural mix.
And I'm Chris Cambion. I'm the Chief Executive of the Nature Conservation Council, and my parents are Anglo-Indians. They came here from India in the early mid-70s, and Anglo-Indians are sort of Indian people who have got some European heritage as well, sort of the mixed breed of India. Well, thanks for joining me, everybody. This event, this discussion came around because a month or two ago, there was obviously quite a lot of public discussion about Black Lives Matter in the US and then the flow-on effect here in Australia. And I know at NCC, we were kind of searching a little bit about what the right way to engage with that question was. And I sort of had this kind of gut feel, this sort of visceral reaction to it, that what I didn't want to do is kind of the usual sort of performative responses, but actually start to get into some of these issues and start thinking about it. And on an episode of Cocktails, I took the liberty of having a little editorial at the end and said, the thing that we don't do enough of is just listen to each other and understand the people's stories and understand people's perspectives. And I thought that having a discussion amongst people that I really respect in progressive movements who have a perspective that I suspect is not heard enough would be quite a valuable thing, and something that I think a lot of people would get something out of. So thanks so much for being here. The first question I wanted to ask you all is, what was your pathway in? How did you get to be a kind of rabble-rousing, agitating activist that you are today?
I'm happy to start being the elder. How's that? My mother tells me that I was an activist from about the age of 2. And that, I think, has to do with asking why. The challenging adults about why they were doing something. And I suppose that my activism is actually quite old. I was an activist in Fiji. I was part of the student movement challenging the notion of French nuclear testing on Mururoa Atoll, and also challenging poverty. I went to school where really, really bright kids who were really poor dropped out of school after year 10 because their parents couldn't afford the fees. And so I felt that was a fundamental injustice that I needed to do something about. So we started a petition where we said that instead of giving the politicians a pay rise, we needed to redirect that so that all students could finish high school. The only problem was that when I signed on to that petition, my father was a politician and he was in government, and my name and signature was on top of that list. And so he was pretty mad about that. And my thing was, well, actually, I believe it's true. I believe that we could go without the pay that we get, because I don't think we need that pay as a family. I think we're okay. But I want these people that I went to school with who are brighter than me, I believe, who need to finish high school, because my parents believed that education was the ticket to freedom, that information, knowledge is power, and they invested in our education. And yet there were people whose parents either had to feed them, young people, or send them to school, and they chose to feed their children. So I think that, and I've been an activist all my life.
Thanks, Asha. Taylor?
So I don't know if my journey's been quite like many others. Someone once told me that to be born black is to be born political. And I, at the time, was a bit confronted by that, but now I realize it's very true. That just to grow up in my family, I feel like this is where I was always meant to be going. When I was a little girl, my mum spent the better part of 20 years researching our family history, because being on the east coast of Australia, obviously invasion hit us first. So a lot of that, family culture, heritage, documents was really buried or lost. So I just grew up with this knowledge around me. I'm very lucky to know where I came from such a young age. When I was 10, at the opening of the Warragamba Dam Information Centre, my great auntie, as an elder, was supposed to give the welcome to country. Excuse me. And she wasn't able to because she was sick. So somehow 10-year-old Taylor got given that job, and I stepped up into that plate. And if you know me well, you know that all my work sort of comes back to Warragamba Dam. So it started there, and from there I got invited to speak at other functions. Again, as a 10-year-old, I don't know what innovative perspectives I was able to offer, but I've certainly grown since that point. Stepping from there into more leadership roles, I work with local and state governments on issues of Aboriginal culture and heritage, but that door was not open to me. I would say I wouldn't have gotten into that without that opportunity at that young age. Just being a constant banging on the door of council in my local area, being a constant face at these things, making sure my voice was heard, whether people wanted to hear it or not. And they don't. I come from a very small, honestly conservative community. If you've ever been to Warragamba, everyone in that town knows each other, and their grandparents and their great-grandparents all went to school together. And I upset a lot of people. From there, like upsetting people and getting over that, like people I've known my whole life being very upset by the work that I was doing, I had to step back and ask, why is this so confronting to them? Me speaking out about these issues that are destroying my country, most recently flooding the Blue Mountains National Park, the Give a Damn campaign. People are very confronted by being told that nature is important, whether you can see it or not, and Aboriginal culture and heritage is important, even though that community is really happy to forget that we're there. So I had to step back and ask myself what I was valuing and what I was supposed to be doing. And I sort of dug my heels in. This all sort of happened at the same time I joined the board of NCC as well, where I was very confronted by joining a group of people that hadn't heard my perspective. I sat down with Chris a couple of months ago after someone said to me there were other organisations for Aboriginal people and people of colour and young people, and this didn't seem like it. And I remember sitting down and thinking, well, what am I doing here? What am I doing in any of these places, at council, in Warragamba broadly, speaking about this issue? And in the environment movement widely, I guess we'll speak about this more later, there is no place for Aboriginal people, but that does not mean that I shouldn't be there. Because to be born black is to be born political. So I have dug my heels in.
Thanks so much, Taylor. Thuy?
Thanks, Taylor and Asha. These are really, really powerful stories. For me, how I got involved was literally someone called me up and said, do you want to volunteer? And this is from the Australian Youth Climate Coalition. And I said, yes. And I think there's a few reasons why I was like really primed and ready to become an activist and to become like a young climate activist and try to save the world. And I think it's because my parents, we are Vietnamese refugees who tried to come here to Australia to make a living and to make a better sort of future. So, but at the same time experiencing quite a lot of like exclusion and othering. And my mother, she, bless her, she protected her family at all costs. She would, stand up for us. And when someone's racially abusing us in like a small corner store that we'd have, she would stand up and fight back. So I grew up sort of around that sort of like immense pride of my cultural heritage. But also my parents told me education is our ticket to success. So the same thing, work hard and you'll earn the respect of these people. And so I took that on board and I studied really hard and I got into a selective school. But an experience like 2 weeks into getting to selective school really reminded me that no matter how hard I work, no matter how smart I am, no matter how well I speak English in an Australian accent, someone will always look at me and see me as someone that doesn't belong here. And I was on the bus 2 weeks into getting into Sydney Girls High School, and some people on the bus started saying, Asians, they never get up off their seat on the bus. And other people started joining in and saying, yeah, Asians, they never get off their seat off the bus, to the point where they started pointing and poking at an Asian woman sitting across from me to get up off her seat. And I felt so uncomfortable that I was driven off the bus. I literally got off early and walked all the way home. And that shook me to my core, because I knew that nothing's going to change by trying to conform and trying to like assimilate. Really, we had to stake our place here. And that's been the motivating factor for me being in the climate movement and now my work as a community organiser at the Sydney Alliance.
Thanks, Thuy. Thanks so much. Tim?
Well, my journey into activism is very much grounded in how I grew up, and my school experience growing up was defined by racism and bullying. My first name became, chink at school. Go back to where you came from became the weekly mantra at the playground. My house was egged multiple times. A whole litany of experiences that showed me early on that people were prepared to treat me differently because of the colour of my skin. And as I got older, I started to realise something else, that injustice tends to manifest in multiple different ways. That while not everybody had experienced the type of pain that I had felt, I started to realise that most people knew what it felt like to be alone, and that most people knew what it felt like to have your back against the wall and, feel like the whole world's against you. I had a good friend who felt like he couldn't be himself because he liked other guys. I had a friend who wrestled with her reflection every time she looked into the mirror because she felt her body image didn't conform to society's expectations of what a woman should look like. And so it was all of these experiences with my friends and family and broader community that showed me early on that there are a whole range of different ways that our system brutalizes, dehumanizes, and erodes the dignity of everyday people. And it was these early experiences over probably about 10 years, growing up in my teens, that proved to me, I think, irrevocably, that we live in a broken system, one that's just fundamentally incompatible with living a meaningful, happy life. And that's what got me into activism. This desire that, with knowledge comes responsibility, and with the relative privilege also comes responsibility to do something about this and try and build a society that works for everybody. Wow,
thanks, Tim. I mean, that sense that with knowledge comes responsibility really resonates with me. My pathway was probably a bit different to all of you in that I don't think I was ever sort of acutely aware of kind of racial, I don't feel like I was kind of the victim of really sort of strong racist actions, although when I think about it more deeply, I realise that I was. That wasn't something that was top of mind for me. My parents came here as migrants in 1974, so not long after it was sort of legal to come here as a brown person, thanks to Gough Whitlam, and they very much came here very intelligent, very knowledgeable about political issues. Because India was such a kind of hotspot for political discussion, but very much not inclined to be engaged in the political process at all. They are people who, I think their great dream for me was that I get a professional degree, lawyer, doctor, something like that. Keep your head down, white picket fence, the whole sort of box and dice of a comfortable life, because that's what they didn't have. And the idea was come here and secure that life for the next generation. But we always talked about politics around the dinner table, and I was acutely aware of justice and injustice. And they're Catholics, we're a Catholic family, and it's pretty hard to divorce social teaching from just the day-to-day issues that go on here or go on overseas or whatever. And so I was qualified to become an HR manager or a trade union official. So, it's no surprise that I decided to become a trade union official and choose a life of kind of discomfort and activism and all of that. So, here I am, against the odds, I suspect. So when I was sort of putting together this idea, one of the things I'm really conscious of is that there are people who want to do the right thing. They really desperately want to, say the right thing and do the right thing and be the right thing. They're definitely people of really good faith. And it seems to me that there's plenty of energy around for diversity and plenty of people who kind of want to embrace diversity in the climate movement or the conservation movement. or any kind of progressive movements, but there's still a blockage there somewhere. Like overwhelmingly, these movements are still really, really white, and in many cases, really, really middle class as well. What do you think anyone chime in here and let's just chat about it. What do you think the barriers are at the moment to people getting involved and people being sort of welcomed?
When people are blind to their privilege, they actually don't own how there's a tendency to separate themselves from the privilege, disadvantage, those discourses. So I hear this quite often. I hear people tell me, oh, I've done cultural sensitivity training, so I can work with this group, but we don't understand why they don't engage with us. So the problem is made to be the other people's problem. I also hear the narrative of activism or the narrative of social change without an ownership of the privilege or advantage that came on the backs of the people you dispossessed. So one of the first things that I do when I talk about myself as a migrant is I acknowledge that I benefit from the dispossession and colonization and dislocation of the Aboriginal people of this land. That my fellow Aboriginal people, the people of colour who are the original people of this land, are actually marginalised in their own land. They are actually, see, for me, that is just the most painful truth that we need to sit with, that this is their land. They have deep ties and connection to their land. And I suppose I got it when I realised that Indian's surname is linked to their village. And I didn't realise that because I came from a colonised people who'd been moved from the country that my people came from. And when I met a real Indian, an Indian from India, he asked me about my name and he said, yes, but what's your clan name? And I said, I don't know. He said, because we all have a name that identifies where we come from. And I felt really sad then, because in the colonization process and the indenturing laboring process, we were arbitrarily made to choose, my ancestors, my grandfather was made to choose a surname. You have to have a surname. But you see, our surnames don't work that way. So they just were allocated a surname. And that lost the connection to the area or the region, the village, the tribe we came from. And to some extent, that was a relationship to that land, to that area. So I want to acknowledge that as a migrant, I thrive here at the expense of the Indigenous people of this land. And I want to sit with that uncomfortable truth. So activism for my colleagues who are white, who are privileged Anglo people, middle class, educated, they mean well, and I really applaud that. But the unwillingness to look deeply at and sit with the discomfort of their privilege coming at the expense of the dispossessed is where I think there's a disconnect. And therefore, there is no way to change the ways in which activism is practiced, the ways in which inclusion is done. And in Voices for Power, we've really challenged that. It's not been an easy journey. I feel like I've been a bit of a lightning rod for the truth. And I've had to really grapple with the anguish of nothing has changed when a white man speaks for me. You know, when a white man tells me I should shut up. And when a white man tells me that I have no right to speak in my own project that focuses on people of color, that has been just incredible for me. But my thing is, oh, well, I'm going to have to speak the truth to power here. I'm going to have to say, actually, I'm calling this out. This isn't okay. So that's my thinking, that we don't want to do the uncomfortable journey of inner awareness.
Yeah, other thoughts on that?
When we're talking about this discomfort, that's something I really I relate to from two sides. One is just altogether, I think we can all agree that being an activist is very uncomfortable. I would say that for myself as an Aboriginal person, my struggle over the last couple of years has been shifting the discomfort that I feel back onto the people who, as you say, need to come to terms with this reality that we are living with, living on a country that was stolen. In the spaces I work, there are I hope you all understand that the only experience I can draw from is the Aboriginal community. So when we're working with Aboriginal elders, this sounds really awful, and that's because it is, that organisations will have elders and Aboriginal people that they talk to because they're easier to talk to, because those people are willing to work within the confines of the structures and the organisations that we are a part of. And a lot of these organisations and these individuals are not willing to bridge this gap culturally and to meet Aboriginal people on their own, land, and to respect those protocols. For example, when you work with an elder, it's really polite and more traditional to go to that elder in their own home, or at least closer to them, rather than get them to come out to you. For so many of them, this is their job. People don't value that, and people don't value their place as our leaders in society. And it falls to the Aboriginal people that look like they're more approachable to be uncomfortable and to try to draw them in, and it shouldn't be like that. What I'm trying to say is absolute disconnect and disrespect, honestly, to what is a very difficult thing to understand, but it's only a conversation away to understand how to talk to elders and how to talk in community. It's hard, and from the other side, when I've had people trying to bridge that gap for me, I can see that as an employer and an employee in that situation, it's very difficult to have those difficult conversations, and I have experienced that directly. It's really hard to tell someone, hey, you're being disrespectful, you need to make an effort and go talk to these people, respect them and their culture. When your money is on the line, and that's a product of the society we live in. But it's because of that I don't see a lot of Aboriginal people engaging in environmentalism, honestly, because they don't see a place for themselves there, and they also don't see other people like them there. And why should they feel they have a place there if people aren't willing to respect them?
Yeah. It's interesting, the working title that I have for this episode is Brown People Burn Too. And the reason... So you're all smiling, which makes me happy, because I think you know what I'm saying. I remember as a kid sort of being told about how I can't get sunburnt because I'm brown. I feel like I'm 44 now, and I've still got white people telling me how to be brown properly. I'm the chief executive of an organisation. I've still got white people telling me how I should be, doing a better job of being brown. I ran for parliament, and I got told that I had deliberately lightened the colour of my skin on my corflute so that I could ingratiate myself to white people and still in person ingratiate myself to brown people. Which was pretty surprising. It was just a pretty strong flash, that's all. And you go less brown in winter. If you're doing it wrong. And I kind of felt a few weeks ago when all the Black Lives Matter stuff was happening, I felt like I was getting another dose of that. You're doing it wrong. You're not woke enough. You're not this enough. You're not that enough. You're not brown enough. You're too brown. Whatever.
I hear quite regularly, and I've heard it recently, that I'm not the right kind of migrant because my English is too good, right?
Yes.
And I wear Western clothes, so you're impersonating a migrant, And it is that right that comes with privilege. But what I'm facing there is that when somebody is blind to their privilege and they believe they have an opinion, and the opinion is on others, on people of colour, the other is then really the topic of interrogation around authenticity. And what happens is that we become silenced then, because what do you say in the face of that? How do you protest too loudly? Do you say nothing? Your authenticity is something that you don't need to justify. It's like, I'm in my skin. What do I have to prove to you in order for you to be taking me seriously? That's profound, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it is a really important point that you just raised there, Asha, around this, especially around this desire for greater representation, that white folks want a particular type of representation and that they'll make space for you, but only if you act within the realms that they see. And I think it's like something that we really need to be wary of as like identity becomes politicized. And I talk to so many people of colour about this sort of either implicit or explicit sense that you're trying to be co-opted, that you are trying to be collected, that you meet, there's some woke, like self-identified woke progressive white person who's seeing you and like knows that if they're associated with you because of your identity, like that will give them some brownie points. And so I think it's like really, really critical that we're aware of what you just said there, Asha, and that we don't let our identities like be capitalized on for brand purposes, and that we are like who we need to be, and we are given the space to be who we are, without strings attached, with no conditions attached.
And I just want to add to that is that the difficulty, the barriers for people like us to be involved is that there's a lack of reckoning, and is really echoing what Asha says, lack of reckoning that white supremacy is just throughout all of our institutions, is built on stolen land. And that manifests in their relationships with us as people of colour and as Aboriginal people. And that has real sort of the microaggressions that we experience, the things that we have to explain, to justify who we are or to justify the value of our work, makes it really hard. And that means people just leave. That's what happens, right? There's just not enough of us here to be able to completely change the system. So then people would leave rather than sticking it out. And so what frustrates me and I'm really valuing is like how I can create more space for people to come in so we can build a bigger team, build a bigger like army of people to just change the system completely. And it's a long journey because often the white progressives, they're our biggest champions, but also some of our biggest obstacles because again, we're not talking, this is an uncomfortable conversation. We're not talking about whether you're a good person or a bad person. We're talking about whether you are not taking advantage, but like you have more power than us because of the privilege in which you are born into. So how are we going to use that power in a way that you have to divest some of that power, which is uncomfortable to talk about too. But also how do you create spaces so that more people can come in and give you those uncomfortable truths. And the lack of organizational, organizations putting their money where their mouth is around diversity, about decolonization, that's what's frustrating for me. Where is the funding to hire more staff? Where's the funding to invest in a leadership pathway for young people of colour to be, and Aboriginal leaders to be part of like the activist conservation movement or the climate movement? We're given like pittance to organize our communities who are the most diverse people in we're talking about I don't know, like so many communities who are so different from each other, but you're hiring one or two people to organize all of them.
Yeah.
That's absurd.
Yeah, so true. One of the things that I'm really struck by is that there isn't an understanding that if you are really practicing inclusion of diversity, your organization will be transformed. And there may be actually a number of people who may not feel comfortable working in a very diverse organization. Ask Chris about my organization. We are such a diverse staff team that the one person who was Anglo could not work with us anymore. There was no place for her to dominate the white worldview that she believed was the right worldview. There was no space for her to actually make comments about Aboriginal people. You know what they're like. There was no place for any of that. And in fact, what happened was that we just practiced inclusion. During Ramadan, we made sure that our Muslim worker had somewhere to pray. We made sure that we don't eat bacon in that workplace. We made sure we don't go to a licensed venue for our staff meetings because we actually wanted to reflect what she'd said to us. She said, I'm most uncomfortable when we hold our staff meetings at the club across the road because it's a licensed venue and I'm in hijab, I don't drink and I don't gamble. So when you ask, how do we do inclusion? You got to change. Either that or stop asking, right?
That's exactly right.
And the acceptable face of Aboriginal people. We have an Aboriginal worker, we took mainstream money to create an Aboriginal role. Now that's really radical and I talk about that openly. I think it's only just and fair that we take mainstream fax funding and create an Aboriginal role. And then we work with people who are just ordinary community members and they are strident and loud and yeah, they are living the poverty, so they're angry. They have a voice in our organization. We're not scared of angry, strident voices because that is what disadvantage and poverty and marginality and exclusion sounds like, right? So that's the thing, that's the uncomfortable thing that people are confronted by. And I think that it's actually amazing when you can have a place for all of that in an organization, when you can embrace the ugly side of dispossession, because that's a product of your, what you're thriving on. And yet, that's where true reconciliation happens, when people are welcome with their strident, angry voices, with their, the language that they have, which may challenge you at times, but that's where reconciliation happens. So it's important, I think. I think it's part of the journey of letting go. Our ideas about why are we fighting to save the environment, by the way? Who are we saving it for? Which folks? That's my question always to my Anglo activist mates. I have many of them. Who are we saving it for you? More of your type or more of my type?
I just wanted to sort of touch on this point that a couple of you have now made about sort of, on whose terms do we kind of have diversity and engage in this stuff. And one of the things that I find incredibly, like that issue of kind of being acceptable, like I speak with a very broad Australian accent and I always have, and that's because I was born here and I grew up here, and like Tim, if you didn't see a picture of us, you wouldn't know that we weren't Anglo. And it seemed like one of the things I'm really hyper conscious of is that most of the time I'm pretty passable. People feel like they can engage with me, and that's not the experience of somebody who speaks with a really broad accent from another country, or someone, and I'm Catholic and I only speak English, and, all of that. Like I've got those kind of advantages. Like this thing of, there's only so much difference or discomfort that we can kind of handle. And I feel like particularly in the environment movement, like to the extent that we're ready to acknowledge racial injustice, we're ready to jump on First Nations justice and all the kind of, it's very possible to be quite performative around that stuff in a way that, Taylor, I want to get your take on this in a second, but in a way that I think is probably not that helpful. But when you're starting to get into the stuff that is just kind of hard, and the stuff that is not a lifestyle choice or sort of familiar or beautiful, it's well and good to want to sprinkle, myrtle all over your morning tea and have beautiful dot paintings on your walls. But, dealing with people that have got honest to God problems is a whole other challenge, don't you think?
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself. There's a couple of things that I would draw out there. This performative relationship people have with the Aboriginal community, and the two things you just said then with the dot painting and then the lemon myrtle, people are really happy to draw out these palatable, attractive parts of Aboriginal culture, but as you say, are absolutely not willing to engage with the nitty-gritty systematic racism and cultural genocide and the ramifications of that is still being experienced today. Certainly all of you in your organisations have heard a welcome to country and a smoking ceremony. I was recently confronted with this conversation with an elder that just absolutely changed my mindset because culturally, when you come into a new place, if you were coming to my house, it'd be really acceptable to smoke you, to get rid of the bad energy and spirit that you bring onto the country and welcome you into our land. It also happens at births, deaths, and marriages. It's a cleansing. So it resets your spirit. So the smoking ceremony at the beginning of every goddamn event is really unsettling people, and it is not culturally correct. It's performative. It's a ticker box. The welcome to country and the acknowledgement to country that people say at the beginning of a lot of events. I can't speak for everyone, but a lot of the events that I have been at as a speaker it's the same thing. Everyone reads the same little prescribed text, and then they move on to the rest of the proceedings. They've ticked their box, they've acknowledged the Aboriginal people, but are not willing to have an ongoing conversation about that. I have seen it in my engagement in the work that I do, that people look at Aboriginals in organisations, myself assuming, well, Taylor's the Aboriginal in the room and she must have all the answers. She knows everything about culture. Taylor, can you please speak to me in language? Can you please explain what this means? Can you please speak on behalf of all Aboriginal people? Is this correct? Like, with no possible understanding that I'm one person from one area and only 22. I cannot take the place of my elders who should be in the room with me. And I have got the next 70 years of my life, ideally, to be learning culture, to be answering these questions when I am also an elder. I honestly don't have any time for it. As I'm here longer, like as I said, the ripe old age of 22, I'm starting to get very sour with people who aren't willing to learn or change in the environment movement, and I'm less willing to bend. So if someone is asking me, what do you think about this? I'm more willing to say I'm a token in this situation. I'm not comfortable with it, so I need to step away. It's happened to me in my most recent work campaigning. I've had to step away and ask myself, is what I'm doing really genuine and benefiting the cause, or am I being brought in to provide the performative Aboriginal tokenistic perspective? And too often it is that. My concern with that, and I would ask the others on the panel, if you have come up with something like this where you've been given this position as a token and you want to step back, how do we do that and still ensure that there's going to be someone there providing a genuine perspective? Because so often for me, I have felt that this performative, tokenistic Aboriginal representation in these situations is the best I can possibly hope for, and that if I'm going to step away, there'll be nothing else there.
So I get it. I mean, I'm the palatable face of Indians from Fiji. People tell me that. They're so audacious. Oh, most of the people we meet from Fiji are uneducated and they seem quite ignorant. I go, yeah, that's poverty for you. That's what colonization does, you know? And so I don't even profess to speak for Fiji Indians. I don't want to do that. I want to say, if you're genuinely interested in engaging with Indians from Fiji, there's a process. And the process is to build a deep relationship with them. I can't speak for 1 billion of us, right? So that's important.
Finally,
that's like, it's so funny that people are so ignorant about tokenism. Like, you know, like, of course I can't speak for all of them. So don't ask me. But yeah, absolutely, I get it. And I would prefer to say that I don't want you to believe that I represent anyone, but I do want you to know that I have a lived history, a lived experience of this. I walk in the footsteps of my ancestors. I know what it's like to be hungry. I know what poverty looks like. I don't ever want to glorify it. It's shit, you know?
Yeah.
So it's that, how long have you got is the question that I ask when people ask me where I come from. And how far back do you want me to go, right?
Well, I tell people that thanks to the internet, I can now trace my family back to the East End of London in 1673.
Wow, amazing.
I trace my family back to. And I don't know how we got brown along the way, but
I really think this comes back to purpose, and I don't think nothing precedes purpose. And I think the reason why a lot of these things happen that we're talking about is because organisations are approaching these conversations, whether they be around representation or policies or whatever, because they feel socially obligated to, and because it validates this quote unquote progressive identity that they have of themselves, or the people who are making decisions have of themselves. Not because they genuinely believe that a more representative org or a more representative movement is essential to realising our vision and achieving our mission. And until organisations genuinely believe that, they actually can't win unless they're a diverse organisation that represents the communities that are most impacted by the issues they work on, then we're going to continue to have this superficial cosmetic reactions and interventions because you won't have organisations that are prepared to make the necessary sacrifices and structural changes that they need to make in order to change things, which we've already sort of talked about. Staffing, that require budgets, that require structure changes, that require jobs, that require money. Organisations need to understand that they're not going to win. None of us are going to win on any of our issues until we're a community that's actually reflective of the issues that we work on.
I think that's spot on, and that's a good segue to my next question, which was, Thuy, can you talk a little bit about Voices for Power, which I think is probably the outstanding example of kind of how to do it a different way?
Thanks, Chris. So Voices for Power, this was a grant given to us by the Energy Consumers Australia, because they recognise that culturally and linguistically diverse communities, the COLD communities, I hate that term, COLD communities are one of the more vulnerable consumers in the electricity sector. And actually none of the regulators, the energy consumer advocates have had any success in engaging these communities. So we were let's try a community organising model. Let's try a relational model of really listening to these communities first, inviting them to be part of the solution, planning together, working together, taking action together, and then coming back and listening all over again. That's what we've been doing over the last 3 years. And I've had the wonderful privilege of working with organisations like Asha's organisation to really link Asha's organisation, all the deep work you've done, to some other organisations and community leaders out there. And we've really built a strong foundation of really diverse community leaders who are trained in community organising, really understand their community, they are relational, they have their communities interests at heart, and they really do believe that if we come together, we're more stronger. And it's been a challenging road, because obviously being part of a organisation who's been led by mostly white folk, there's been a lot of assumptions made about how we work with these communities. And so it's how do we avoid being token? That's a key thing that we've been working towards. How can we really entrench the process of decolonisation as well as organising with these communities? And it's been a long road, long. Yeah, right now we are organising across 7 communities across Sydney, very multicultural coalitions, really amazing leaders. And we're starting to do a lot of work in local communities about what is the local energy sort of project that we're going to put our efforts behind, what is going to really benefit our communities in the short term, and how we're going to have these meetings and win that. And it's been we can avoid being token because we have so much of us now, which has been the long road that we've been working on.
Yeah, it's a pretty wonderful program. Tim, I'm interested in I think most of us know what democracy in colour broadly is, but I'm interested in your insight into what did you, on that journey, what have you discovered? What are the things that you found surprising through the Democracy in Colour project?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if I can just quickly say something about Voices for Power, I just think it connects to the previous point around purpose, is that organising communities in Western Sydney, one, it's the right thing to do from a values perspective, because it's how do we represent the tomorrow we're fighting for in how our organisation and how our movements operate today. But 2, it's just smart because it's such a politically strategic area, and on no issue that progressives are working on, we're winning. We're definitely not winning on climate, and I just don't understand why the environment movement and the climate movement more broadly hasn't invested in places like Western Sydney and in those communities that Voices for Power works with, just from a strategic level. So yeah, anyway, to answer your question, look, there's heaps of things that are surprising. I mean, I don't even know where to start. I think, I just think, mate, it's not necessarily surprising, but just like the amount of like work that's already happening. You know, there's this idea that the communities that we work with are like voiceless, and that what we need to do as a broad movement is give these communities a voice. And what we like knew beforehand, but it has been 100% shown through every interaction I've had with the communities we work with, is that these communities already have a voice. They're already doing great work. The problem is that they're being systematically silenced through, structural racism within our spaces and in the broader community. So I just think, it's not about like making our communities politically active or whatever. They're already doing extraordinary work. The problem is they're not resourced, they're not paid, there's no salaries, they're not resourced with training, they don't have support structures. And so, like, of course it leads to burnout, and it's also like mutes the potential impact that we could be having. So I think that's like one thing that's just reiterated it for me, that there is extraordinary work that's being happening right now, like First Nations-led work, people of colour-led work, normally grassroots work. And just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not happening. And that there are no voiceless communities, that they're all just silenced in some way by systemic and structural discrimination and institutions. And I think the other thing is, which is related to something that we brought up earlier, is this idea of like hating the game, not the players. And my job in particular, like at Democracy in Colour, involves me having lots of conversations with people who lots of like diplomatic conversations with people who aren't necessarily on the same page as the organisation, and I'm trying to get them to do something that I want them to do, whether it's join the People of Colour Placement Program or do an anti-racism training or whatever. And I think like just being reminded constantly that we live in a white supremacist, patriarchal, predatory capitalist society, and so we've all been conditioned and socialised from birth to act in certain ways. And just I think remind us to be generous to people, to hold each other accountable 100%, but also to be generous in that, like, the system we're in causes extraordinary pain, like to both impacted communities, but also to everybody, because there's this idea like ethical living is impossible under capitalism, and I just don't think any of us can live ethical lives or values-led lives, even though like we live in a culture that creates extraordinary pressure for us to do so. And I think I've come to learn to be more generous and compassionate to people that I work with, especially those who are on the journey, and remind myself consistently, while still holding people accountable, that we've been socialized and conditioned from birth to act in ways that damage and hurt other people and other communities. And we need to create the platforms that challenge that structural discrimination, those structural systems, and only by doing that can we build a society that's where the dignity of everyone is honoured.
There's a lot of guilt going around, don't you think?
Yeah, 100%.
Like when Black Lives Matter was happening a few weeks ago, and there's sort of this outpouring of guilt, which I can't speak for everybody, but I find it suffocating. I find it really hard.
Yeah. I don't want people to feel guilty. I feel very angry when people talk about their guilt. I have a position on it that says either you're part of the problem or you're part of the solution, and the solution is something you don't know. Not knowing is okay. Flounder for a bit and ask the people who are living this about how you can support their agenda. It's their agenda, not yours, right? Really,
in a second, I want to ask everybody, because the people watching this program are going to be like, but what do I do? What do I do? But I want to be a good person. What do I do? You people are telling me what I'm doing wrong. And I mean, the kind of this extreme emotional reaction I had, and a couple of people who happened to be on the phone to me at the wrong time, kind of copped it in the ear. including Jackie, who co-hosts the program with me, where I just want people to shut up for just 5 minutes. Just shut up. It doesn't have to be you talking all the time. Like, just listen to somebody else, any other voice. Like, and the more unusual the voice, the better. Like, don't even listen to me. Just shut up for 2 minutes and let someone else's voice be heard. What's your like? What do white people do?
This is a really important question, but I think is what do white people do? What do we all do, right? Like, for me, it just with Black Lives Matter, all that is coming up, I felt guilt too, right? I also felt that I was in my feelings for many weeks about what I'm not doing enough. And like what I personally, I want to put a action in place, because solidarity is not a one moment. It's not like performing the good thing at that time. It is a long-term process. So what are the systems that I'm putting in for myself to make sure that I'm always learning, listening, and evolving my thinking about how I personally can be a better ally to Aboriginal struggles, a better ally to other struggles. And for me, that was like reading Decolonizing Solidarity, starting a book club with all my mates who are in the progressive movement. Many of them are white, to really work through, as non-Aboriginal people, how can we be better allies? How can we decolonize our solidarity? Especially if we're in the climate movement that has further nuances around, land struggle and like land rights and how that and then our struggle for like climate justice. So what are the concrete things that you can do to shut up, do your own work, learn for yourself? Don't have to call up your one Aboriginal friend and ask them what to do. No, do the work. Google is there. There's so many resources out there. Read and make it a consistent practice of reflection and reading and learning. And then put your money where your mouth is, right? Are you donating to those? Are you paying the rent? Are you donating to organizations who are really investing in those marginalized communities? Start doing that. Like there's so many, and then how are you transforming your own organizations, organizing within your own organization to change those systems? And let's talk about how we do that together. How do we completely transform all of our environmental organizations that we are part of? Let's openly talk about, conspire about it, collaborate, and let's put a plan in place. Because I'm a person of action as well as an organizer. Let's do things rather than talking about it.
I often think about when I was sort of first getting interested in getting involved in activism and politics and all of that, and the choices that I made and things that I would do different. What if you could go back in time? I mean, Taylor was like 5 minutes ago. For the rest of us, Tim was probably about 10 minutes ago. But what's the advice you would give to your younger self about deciding to pick up a life of activism and social change and trade unionism and all these I think really important movements? Like what's the advice you would give yourself?
Considering it was like 5 minutes for me, I would say that from 10-year-old Taylor to 22-year-old Taylor, I'd honestly give the same advice. I need to stop being a doormat for people. I don't want to be the Aboriginal person that makes people comfortable. My resolution into the future is that I want to make people uncomfortable, confront reality and do something about it. Like when you guys were just talking about Black Lives Matter, do your own research and stop putting that onus on me. I need to be putting my foot down and stop doing the work for other people, because we all have access to the same resources. We're all struggling in different ways through the same really crappy reality at the moment. And I feel like I would tell young Taylor, you don't have to hold that burden and be everyone's go-to and answer, really. And literally 10 minutes ago, like last week, I needed to hear that. Tomorrow, I'm going to need to hear that. And that's going to be something I battle for the rest of my life.
I think the main thing is there'd be a few things. Like one around, it's a marathon, not a sprint, and that I need to do what I need to do to take care of myself. And I'm sure I'm in this for the long term. This fight doesn't need martyrs; it needs people who are playing the role they need to play. I think the second one around thinking systemically, that you can't hope for a solution if you haven't diagnosed the problem properly, and just bringing everything back to how our broken economic system creates the conditions for extraordinary pain and creates the fertile environment for con artists and merchants of fear to weaponize our differences and to weaponize race. And then probably, you know, maybe a last point around that you deserve to be in the space. I think like a lot of us suffer from imposter syndrome, and that like actually, and a lot of us have been conditioned. You know, there's a lot of internalized racism, and a lot of us have been conditioned to judge ourselves, whether that be what we look like or our sense of worth by the standards of by white standards that just that are impossible for us to meet because they're not reflected or built around us. And just to remind myself that you know, we are all intrinsically beautiful and worthy and you know, perfect as we are, and that we don't need to change to meet the standards of a society that was never built or designed for us, and that is sustained, in fact, by eroding our dignity on a daily basis.
Imposter syndrome. My God, you have just, I feel like crying. Thuy?
I think those are all beautiful points. And I think the thing I would add, I wish I heard all of that when I was younger as well. A thing I would add is that just really be very clear about what grounds you in this work, because it is a struggle and it is going to be uncomfortable, and we need you to stick it out. Like, just speaking to everyone there, we need you to stick it out, because you know, power concedes nothing without a struggle. And what really drives you, like, draw from like the strength and resilience of your ancestors, your family, your journey of coming here, because we survived against all odds, right? There's a reason why we're all here. And if you're honoring that, and speaking to also migrant kids, are we honoring our parents? In doing this, we're honoring our parents' sacrifice as well. We don't need to necessarily get a law degree or become a doctor, but like, how is it that you think you best can honor that sacrifice, and how can that drive you and to make a better world for the next generation? Like, really hold on to that, because there are moments in time where you will be shaken in your, like, whether this is the right thing, whether you are the right person. But if you have that grounding and foundation under you, like that, you won't waver from that. And it is okay to struggle. It is really okay. It is okay to ask for help and find your community, right? Like in this, I was found, like, these people are my community. So that, find those people who are your co-conspirators, who are going to, we're going to revolution together, like take this on together.
Yeah, absolutely. And Asha?
The two things I want to share. One is that when I first met Chris, I saw him as one of us, one of my peeps. That's what we call people in my family. I have a very multicultural family, but we have this saying, my granddaughters say to me, Nani, that's one of your peeps, and they mean a person of color. And so when I met him, I had, I think, probably a very uncomfortable conversation with you, Chris, when I asked you which part of you was Indian. Had you done that journey? Yeah. To reclaim your Indianness, because I saw you reflected, I saw myself reflected in you. I saw my son reflected in you. And I wanted you to be strong in that sense of, I am part of this community of people of color. So I asked you that, and I think it probably made you very uncomfortable, but that's okay, because I felt it was such an honor to meet you. I would, looking back, I have one regret. I believed the experts when they told me that I shouldn't speak my language to my child, to my daughter. And I was married to an Aussie, and I was young, and so I felt a bit unsure. And they told me that she'd be mentally retarded if I spoke my language to her. That was the prevailing belief in 1976, and I was a young mother. And so, because I had started to speak to her in both languages, and I realize now that I'm so strong in my sense of self because I have language. And the language of my heart, the language that makes my heart sing, is the language of my ancestors. It's Hindi. And I've denied my children that. And my son said that to me very clearly as a teenager when I swore at him in Hindi. He said, do not speak to me in the language of my ancestors that you've denied me. Do not curse me in the language of my ancestors. You've denied me that language. And I was mortified. So I would say to my younger self and to all of you, reclaim what you can. It is freely available now. And please tell the stories, the narrative of your family to your children and grandchildren. I've done that. I've done that for my granddaughters. My granddaughter meeting, and she is Samoan, Indian, Irish, Australian Catholic, Danish, German Jewish. She's multicultural Australia. How does she identify? I'm an Indian Samoan Australian Nani. Why does she feel so strongly Indian? Because she's so loved and celebrated in who she is. So the most loving and strong thing you can do for people around you is to affirm their humanity and reclaim your heritage as much as you can. And please tell the stories. You must story the life of your families, their suffering, their hardship to your children and grandchildren, so they have a strong sense of self. Yeah. That oral tradition must be kept alive.
Yeah, thanks, Asha.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do remember that conversation we had when we first met. And, for me, I've never wanted, my cultural background is so confused and confusing. And I've never really, I've never wanted the thing that makes me different to be the most interesting thing to know about me. I've always run away from that. And a few years ago when I was running for Parliament the first time in 2016, I was at a function and somebody who I think possibly was a Chinese Australian was talking to me, and she said, how do you talk about your cultural background in the context of sort of mainstream politics? And I said, look, to be honest, I don't. I really, it's not, to me, it's not the most important thing about me or what I've got to say or anything like that. So I try to avoid it. And she said, can you start? Can you start talking about it, please? Because the fact that you're here and the fact that you're doing this and the fact that you're in this role is really important to a lot of other people. And I think there's something that I'd like sort of 18-year-old me to know that. That there's probably a lot of people who are looking for role models. And I think the thing that we can all do is maybe try to be that. So you got to help me settle an issue here. But there was a number of people on the staff at NCC who get really uncomfortable when I refer to myself as being brown, and of course that encourages me to do it more. So what are we allowed to say? Is it people of colour? I find that euphemistic.
I call myself black. That gets people very upset on all sides. I'm black. I have black consciousness. My heart is black.
I'm not culturally and linguistically diverse. I've only got one culture. I've only got one linguistic. I don't have sort of a split personality or anything. What are we allowed to say? Tim, you're the expert. What's the right terminology for us to be politically correct about describing ourselves?
I'm definitely not the expert, but my personal opinion is that there is no perfect term. And for me, it's more about how do we build a shared political solidarity amongst different communities that are experiencing similar but very different challenges and discrimination. And how do we do that in a way that centres First Nations sovereignty and also the unique and pronounced racism that Black communities in particular face. And how do we do that in a way that builds political solidarity, that builds our collective political power, but also builds intra-community solidarity between communities of colour, so that non-Black people of colour are tackling the anti-Blackness that's rampant in their own communities and being effective accomplices. Yeah, so that's what I'm interested in, rather than how do we what terms do we use? We use at Democracy in Colour, people of colour, and recognise it's a very fluid term, and it's also from the US, and anything you sort of pick from one country and randomly place in another context is never really going to work. But it's more because there isn't really. I'd love to hear a better term. Cold is definitely not something we'd ever use. But our interest is much more in how do we build this project, this political project together to build all of our powers and make sure that we don't make invisible the very real differences between our communities and the very disproportionate discrimination that different people of colour face and First Nations and Black people face, whilst also building this collective front to push back against white supremacy.
Yeah, brown, Chris.
I figure.
I think the more uncomfortable people are, the more you should just lean into it.
Yeah. Without a doubt.
I used to drink my tea with just one little drop of milk, which would literally mean that the colour of the tea was this. And so I used to say to people, when people say, how do you like your tea? I'd say, I like my tea the colour of me. And meltdown.
Do it.
Down.
Do it more. Yeah.
Because people just go, well, what colour is that? I'm like, using you can see me make the tea this colour. It's not hard. It's not ideological. I just removed the milk. I just said I'll have a black thing.
So when people say to you, I don't notice that you are different, and when people say to me, I don't notice that you are brown or Indian, do you know what I say? What the fuck, are you blind? Right? Because it's pretty bloody obvious that I'm an Indian woman, and a fat Indian woman at that.
Well, it was a longer one, but
very well worth it. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks everybody for sticking in there for a bit of a longer episode, but I thought it was we both thought it was an important one to not cut down. Really, we tried not to edit it too much, just a few ums and ahs.
Yeah.
Jackie, you are flying solo next episode in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, that's right.
What? Because I'm on another show in 2 weeks' time.
Well, you won't be spruiking your show here because
I'm on the competition.
Yeah. Yes. No. It's definitely going to be worth tuning in to see me on my own as I speak to Kai Wild, who's an arborist and koala rescuer. Kai went down to Kangaroo Island after the bushfires wreaked havoc there, as they did across lots of Australia, and climbed lots of trees to save lots of koalas. So I'll be talking to Kai about his experience and about the plight of koalas here in New South Wales as well.
Fantastic. Thanks for all the questions that we got through the chat. It was a nice, refreshing change to be able to actually engage in the chat and the questions, because we were not doing anything else. We were just watching the episode too. So that was really great. And for all those people who were kind of interested in learning more or getting more involved with dealing with some of these issues, open invitation. Please feel free to get in touch. One of the things that we really want to do is make this a more diverse movement. And the way that we're going to achieve that is by people like you deciding to make your local group more connected with the diversity of your local community. So that makes a huge difference to the work that we're trying to do, and we're here to support you with that work. So please do be involved. Thanks to everybody for joining us. And if you liked the show tonight, spread it around. It's all recorded. It's on Facebook as we speak. So please share it around. And it's also on our website at nature.org.au. So the more people that see the discussion tonight, let's get this conversation going throughout the movement. It'd be absolutely wonderful.
Good one. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, everybody.